Okay, so welcome probably back to many of you. This is really, it'll exist standalone, but unless you know a decent amount about WCF Data Services, these are going to be some pretty advanced concepts. So probably most people are attending after having attended the intro scenario. And there we went over a couple of things. We talked about how to expose a WCF data service. We talked about how to customize the feed for the service so that you can see the titles and dates and so on. And then we talked about the various ways of consuming a service. And we also talked about basically the final demo or set of demos was really taking a two-tier application that was talking directly to a database and moving it to a three-tier application where we were going through an OData service. And actually, I do want to call out a couple of things there. So I did post it on my blog, the Data Services webinar. I think I said I would do it the next day, and I got something happened, some emergency happened. I can't remember exactly now, but it was a work emergency came up, and so it was actually 48 hours later that I actually posted this. And I said the slides, and there were a couple of issues that we had encountered last time. They were pretty easily fixed. So one was this resource not found exception. We needed to add basically add a context, ignore resource not found exception. That was because we were querying for things that may or may not exist. So let me just pull up the project as we had it last time, and I'll open up the Scan in Books app, and we were talking about the enter new view model. And oops, sorry, I was playing around. That's another way to fix it. So let me undo that. Like, that's, interestingly enough, that works. The T where 1 equals 1 and the ISBN is the one that we've typed in. That actually works as well, but probably the more the one that's not black magic is basically just to set this property, because we are doing a query that may or may not exist, and we don't really care if it's not found. We just want to get the null returned in that case, not throw an exception. So with that, we've got basically the same code that we had last time, and I went ahead and posted that to the blog that you saw there, brainhertzconsulting.com, brainhz consulting. Okay, so this time we are going to talk about some more advanced things, namely JSON. So there's my dog is barking, apologize for that. There's two different ways to expose a service using JSON. There's basically the old way and the new way, and we'll talk about that. We'll talk about some various options for getting child collections, either on demand or eager fetching. We'll talk about some of the issues that you may have to deal with when you've updated entities on your client and you issue another query and those entities have changed on the server. We'll talk about adding or augmenting your service using what are called service operations. We'll talk about doing server-side paging. So we already know how to use skip and take to page through it on the client side. But the problem is, if you have tables that have hundreds of thousands of rows, you can easily get DOS, denial of service, attacked. Because all they have to do is just issue that same query sort of over and over again, and your server is going to be doing a lot of work, and there's going to be a lot of that socket's going to be tied up. Anyway, so basically, to protect yourself a little bit, you should probably implement server-side paging, and we'll talk about how to deal with that on the client side. And last time, just as a reminder, we talked about a method of indirection, or really two different methods of indirection between the database. We said WCF Data Services is not just taking your database and exposing it on the wire, because you take a model and you have a way in your model to leave out certain columns or leave out certain tables. Right, and so that's one layer of indirection. And then even from the model, you have to choose which tables you want to expose. So there's another layer of indirection. Interceptors allow basically a filter by row level, right? So to filter out certain rows. And we'll look at those. And then we'll talk about updating when you're talking about custom data models. So last time we used a entity framework to expose a books service, and we also built our own people data service, I believe it was, that used a custom model that we developed, an in-memory model. And then lastly, we're going to wrap up by talking about some additional hosting options. So hosting in self-hosting and hosting in MVC. Using MVC, we can use service routes to eliminate the need for that .svc. And then finally, we'll talk about how you can utilize OData in Web API. We talked about that briefly last time because we had a couple of questions related to when would I want to use Web API versus when would I want to use OData, and it turns out that there are still reasons to use one over the other, and they can be used in concert, in parallel with one another. So that's what we've got on the agenda today. If there's anything else you'd like to touch on, please feel free to add it in your questions. Okay. So the first thing is the JSON, and there are really two different JSON formats. There's the one that existed prior to the 5.3 version, and then there's the one after that. So if you have the newest version, really the best way is to, from the generated proxy, just go ahead and say context.format.useJSON. And that will change things over. But if you don't have the latest version, or if you wanted to interoperate with clients that don't have the latest version, then the clients would need to say accept, and they'd also need to pass an additional header, which is the max data service version of 2.0. There's another thing that you can do, which is you can specify application/JSON semicolon OData equals verbose. Although that to me feels a little bit yucky. Okay, so let's just do a quick demo of that. So we had over here in Visual Studio our WCF service. And if I just set that as the startup project and run it out of browser, it should pop open a query window, and here's our book service. And if we go to books, titles, there's our feed from last time, and we can go in and manipulate the feed view. We have to close it again. Let me copy that, close this, open it, paste, go. Okay, so there's our feed view, and you can see that this is XML. And now if I go to Fiddler, and let's go ahead and refresh that. Okay, there's our call to Books Data Service, and you can see that the data coming back is in XML. If we go ahead and go over to the Composer and we drag this in, you can see that this is what the headers were when we requested the titles. But if we go ahead and we change the accept here to be application/JSON, and we add in another max data service version. I think it's max data service version. Let me just double check on the slide real quick. Max data service version, yes, of 2.0. And we execute it again. Now this time, when we look in the inspector, you can see that what we're getting back is some JSON. So here's, just look at the scroll bar, if you will, on the bottom right of the Fiddler. And let me actually switch between these two. So there's the XML, and there's the JSON. Oh, I see what's going on. So Fiddler is truncating. I'm going to go ahead and right-click and disable the auto truncation. And so there's the XML, and you can see that the amount that we're looking at is a very small amount. When we go to JSON, because it's a little bit more compact, you can see that this bar is increased a little bit. And then finally, if we go over into Composer one more time and we get rid of this max data service version and we execute one more time and we look in the inspector this time, you can see that we're seeing almost the entire payload, even though I'm talking about many titles of books. All right, so you can see it's even more compact, and that's the new JSON version. All right, so we have XML, old JSON, new JSON. Okay, so that's that. Let's go back over. Oh, another thing is prior to the so prior to the 5.3 version, you used to have to turn on support for through the browser looking at the JSON. But now we can go ahead and go here and we can say question mark $ format equals JSON. And then because this is IE, it prompts us if we want to open or save it. So we'll go ahead and open, and you can see that there's the JSON format. In fact, I could turn on word wrapping. I think there it is. Didn't see it for a while. And you can see that there's all of our data coming back. And it's the smaller data by default. And we can do that from the browser just by doing format equals JSON. But in prior versions, you used to have to add a JSON P behavior. And in the notes, I went ahead and added what happened to JSON and also the place to get the data services JSON P behavior. Okay, so moving on. The next thing we want to talk about is loading related entities. And in this particular case, we want to load them explicitly after the fact. So we already went and queried for, let's say, the products. And now, based on maybe some user interaction or something like that, we want to go ahead and load the category for that product. And you can do that using the context.loadProperty method. Okay, and so let's go ahead and look at our existing application and take a look at how we might do something like that. Okay, so maybe what we want to do, let's just run it first to see where we're at. And let me also get rid of Fiddler. You don't need to be going through that. Okay, so this is where we're at, and maybe what we want to do is when they select a row or something like that, we want to go ahead and load the authors for this particular book, right? So we'll go in here into the XAML, and we will add another column to display the primary author. Remember, a book may have more than one, and we're just going to display the first one. And we'll say primary author. Okay. And if we look in title extended, there is already a primary author field which does authors first or default. Let me just go ahead and copy that one, and we'll comment that out. We're going to make it public. We are going to, actually, I'll make a field for it. And I'm actually going to make a string field. Let's say primary author. And let me just go refactor encapsulate. Hello. Put it at the bottom. And because we're talking about model view, view model, this is really unrelated to this course. Well, it's not totally unrelated to this course. So one of the things to note when it generates you the entities from the data service reference is that it does generate the on-property change notification. So there's the book's entities, but if we look in the class for title, right, you can see that it does implement iNotify property changed automatically. So you don't have to add any of that support in, but here we're extending it with our own custom field. And so when this does change, we do want to go ahead and call on property changed of primary author. Okay. So now we've got that. Let's go ahead and load it when we click upon an item. And so in the main view model, we don't have anything right now, but right now we just have the collection of books. We're not keeping track of which one is selected. So that's one thing we'll need to do. So let me go ahead and say, yeah, I'm gonna need a selected book. And we'll do the same thing, refactor, encapsulate, selected book. And when this does get set, well, we do want to go ahead and fire the property change notification. So, this is using mine. This is my main view model, and it's using my view model base. And I use the cool little, C#4 trick where I can say color member name, so I don't actually have to pass in my property name. So this is going to be Ray's property changed, and I don't have to pass anything because it'll know who I'm calling from already. Okay, so but once we've done that, this is kind of a nasty thing to do. I wouldn't do this ordinarily. I'm going to actually call some methods. I'm basically from a property implementing a side effect, and that is not a good thing to do. But let's say from this, I wanted to go ahead and look up the author on demand when they select a new book. So I can say var context, equals, and now might be a good time to actually do a little bit of refactoring. So you can see that before we were doing this context equals new books entities service URI. I'm actually going to go ahead and create a little factory right now. So let me go ahead and do that. Add new item, and we'll just create a like a context factory. And this will be a public, and we'll just make it a static class for right now. And we want the we want this. So refactor method. Next, and this is going to be create context. Next, and then we're going to do a public, and then refactor move to context factory. Next. Whoa, that was weird. Okay, cool. So there's our create the context. And that's what we're going to do here. And I have a reason for doing this. Just hang with me a second. Okay. And so there we've got our creating of the context. And then once we've done that, we want to utilize the context. It turns out that we have a book that was retrieved from an earlier version of the context. So when we want to use the book from this context, we have to do, first thing we have to do is an attach. So this is going to be like attach to and selected book. And, I think we need, yeah, sorry, you have to tell it the entity set name. So we're going to attach this selected book to the titles collection, and then we're going to do what we had on the slide there, which is context load property, and we want to load from the selected book, we want to load the authors collection. Okay, and then to get the XAML to go ahead and refresh, we have to set the primary author from the other class. So we'll say, first we'll get the primary author equals selected book.authors.first. And then we'll say selected book.primary author equals, and we'll say primary.first name plus primary.last name. Okay, and that's, sorry, those are properties. Okay, yeah, and there's a lot of things about this that are yucky, and I know that. I'm just trying to show you how to load on demand is really what I'm doing here. So let's run it one more time. And if we click, well, it doesn't seem to be working, does it? Let's see what's going on here. Okay, yes. Well, what's happening is this selected book is not actually getting triggered, and that's probably because I forgot to hook up the XAML. So we've got data grid, we've got item source. Yes, we need to hook up the selected item equals, and then binding to selected book, I think it was called. Okay, let's try that one more time. Hopefully this time we get a breakpoint. Okay, built to last. I don't even know what that is. Oh, I guess it's Jim Collins or whatever his name is. Okay, yes, that time we got the context, we attached, we loaded the property, we grabbed the author and we set it. And sure, you know, there's Jim Collins is filled out, right? So we can remove the breakpoint. And as we click on them, you know, they are being loaded into the property, the author's property is being loaded. Cool. Any questions about that? Okay. I have one question which says yes. I'll just remove that. Okay. Okay. So the next thing we want to talk about is doing more of a eager loading, right? And so here what we want to do is we want to expand the child collection right when we're loading it for the first time. So I want to grab all the titles, but I also want to get all their authors right away. Okay, and so to do that, I guess one of the ways we can do it is to go back to what we had before. So on the view model, the title extended, wherever the heck that is, there we go. Let's get rid of this, and let me just put a little comment for so you guys will know after the fact for what I was doing here. This is for explicit loading, and we'll go back to what we had before. And actually, let me make it a string, and we'll just use so authors first dot first name plus space plus authors first that last name. Actually, you know what? Let me just do a quick little refactor variable here. I don't like author. Okay, so good. So there's our primary author, but of course it's expecting the author's collection to actually be filled in order to fill out this information. So we need to grab that when we actually load the collection. So if we go to, let's see, the entity, the inner new view, no, I'm sorry, the main view model. And we can get rid of this right now. And we'll say explicit loading. And now what we want is this query for books. We want to go ahead and eager load this. So to do that, we are going to need to refactor this into a variable. And what we really want is like a, let's see, expand. And we want to expand the authors collection. And then, yeah, that's good for now, I think. Let's see if that works. Yeah, okay, cool. So you can see that the books are loaded automatically, all of the authors are loaded, and their information has already been filled out in the primary author. Okay, any questions? No, no questions yet. Okay, good. Straightforward enough. Okay, so the next thing we want to talk about is merge options. And where this comes into play is when you have, multiple clients and they are both making changes to one another. And both making changes to the underlying data set, and they're trying to overwrite each other, right? And so the question is, if I do a requery on my client, what should happen to the entities that have been changed on the client? And by default, it's append only. So if there are new entities, those will be overwritten, but any of the existing entities, nothing will happen. Oftentimes, you may want preserve changes, so only the changes that have been made on the client should be preserved. Any other updated fields that are coming from the server should be integrated in. And of course, you can take the extreme route of overwrite changes where, the server, those changes are happening, those are always updating whatever is on the client. So like in a specific refresh scenario. So let's see, if we wanted to do something like this, we would go into the XAML and we would have a new button. And this would be, hello. That was weird. Copy, paste. What the heck? Oh, because I'm running. Copy, paste. There we go. Works much better when you're not running. Okay, so we'll say refresh, and we want refresh, and we'll go ahead and save. And then in the, so right now I'm using kind of a hodgepodge of model view model and normal, button subscribing, just because I didn't want to grab a framework and have to explain the framework and whatnot. So I'm going to continue doing that. Okay, so when our refresh is called, we want to basically do what we have already done, which is view model.query for books. Okay, and we can set, how we're querying for books by, if we go back to the main view model, here's our query for books method, and we're using the context factory create context. So in there, we can say, context.merge option equals merge option. And so here we can let it know, we want to go ahead and preserve changes, for example. All right. And then if we go ahead and run, if we run, and, we do refresh, we get the same books back. But if we make a change locally, so I'm going to temporarily change the Great Gatsby to, oh crap. I'm sorry, I forgot to hook up I don't think this is going to work. It said it worked. I don't know if I believe it. And then if I go, for example, to the Great Gatsby and in the database, and I changed the publish year to 1990. So let me open up a little Management Studio window. And we'll go to Books, New Query, and we'll say update title. Set the, I think it's called the publish date equal to, what was it, 1990-0101, oops, 01, where title like Great Gatsby. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. Okay, and then if we do refresh, okay, there it did not change. Yeah, I think that's my fault. That's because I haven't hooked up this data grid to change to basically make the editing when I edit the properties. Let's see, and that may be more than I want to do. I'll come back to that at the end, see if I have time. But if I had done that, what you would have seen is the fiction would have stayed false and the publish year would get updated. You saw already that the publish year was updated, so already we know that this is not append only. It either has to be preserve changes or overwrite changes, right? So definitely the behavior changed from what it was before, but we don't know exactly if we got that right. Okay. So one way of dealing with concurrency in the database and then changing the data services to basically utilize what you've already done in the database is to use a column with a timestamp or a row version, and then basically indicate that to data services, and that token will be passed with the eTag HTTP header. And so when it goes ahead and it does an update, and the row version or timestamp is changed out from under it, you will get a data service request exception, right? Which is probably what you want to do, rather than just guessing about what I was doing, overwriting, preserving. You actually want to know, it was changed by someone, and I want to know what exactly changed. Okay, again, I'll try and come back to that a bit in the end. Okay, so service operations is the next thing we want to talk about. And I mentioned last time that WCF Data Services, the reason why they changed the name to WCF Data Services was to reflect the fact that this was built with WCF. And in fact, we had in our WCF service, we added this service behavior, which said include exception details and false true. And that allowed us to get the information from the exception back to the browser. And that is a WCF attribute. So you can tell that this thing is a WCF service. Well, in WCF REST-based services, you have the operations which are really dependent on data, but you can go ahead and add other operations as well that are not necessarily related directly to the data that you're serving up. And so you can extend the WCF data services to add these additional type of operations, either a web get or web invoke operations. So here in the top example, you can see that I have my Northwind data service that I've been dealing with the whole time in the slides, and I've added a new method, and I've attributed it to, say, web get. And here I can augment my service to go beyond the standard, create, read, update, delete. So this is a specialized query that I want to support for example. And this is another way of creating a further indirection from the underlying data source. Okay, so let's go ahead and do one of these. Go in here. So here's our books data service. Stop. And I want to expose something that maybe is not exactly related to my normal data. And so I'm going to say this is going to be a web get, and I'm going to say public string current time, and I'm going to return datetime.now.toString. Whoops. And let's see. Oh, the other thing we have to do is this is a service operation. So we need to make sure that we are setting the service operation access rule to allow that. So just like before, you can use star, or I could say, of course, current time to only allow that one. For service operation access rule, these you have to add any, sort of by hand anyway, so I always set star for this. I rarely ever set specific rules, unless I want to do something like min debug, in which case set these up, otherwise the other ones, something like that. But okay, so that's that. Let me rebuild everything. And oh, it's running currently. Is that what's going on? No. Huh, that's very strange. It's not running. That was weird. Okay, I'm not sure what happened there. Basically, those DLLs were in use, and then I built them again, and then they weren't in use. Okay, I'm just going to sort of ignore that. And we'll set WCF service as the startup project, and we'll run it. And then from the browser, we should be able to say current time. And there you go. You can see that 11:37:48 was returned, and so that's the current time. So that's how we can augment our existing services with additional operations or queries without having to rewrite all of the CRUD operations, etc. Okay, any questions on that? Nope. Okay, moving right along. I think we're about halfway through here. Okay, there are some important restrictions on service operations. One thing to note is in terms of parameters, they must be primitive parameters only. In other words, strings, really. The methods must return either nothing or an IEnumerable or queryable of the type in the model, or a primitive, right? So mine returned a string. That was fine. To support querying, the methods must return iQueryable, which makes perfect sense. They have to be marked webGet or web invoke method equals post, so there's no such thing as a put or a delete or any of the other web invokes. And remember, you have to set the service operation access rule. Okay, so those are some restrictions on the service operations. Okay, so the next one, this one is quite cool and quite complicated. Basically, your paging. So right now, when I go to my titles, actually I can do it from here even. So books, tables, titles, select. Okay, we got 774 books basically in the database right now. And, that may be, think about it if I added a couple zeros there, and then when I go ahead and say, do I have it already open? Yeah, right here, even without the JSON. You can see it takes a little bit of time, maybe even only with 774, but you can imagine the amount of data that I would have to stream out for, you know, hundreds of thousands of records. I mean, that's quite a lot, because it has a lot of metadata information about where I can go from here, in addition to the entity properties themselves. So if I, you know, get a client which just basically, you know, spawns a bunch of threads and then calls that method to get all the titles over and over again, I can easily denial of service my server, just because I'm serving out so much data in such a short amount of time. So it's a good idea, maybe not this low. Let's try something like 50. It's a good idea to avoid denial of service attacks on tables that expose a large number of rows, to go ahead and turn on server-side paging. Right? And here we set, using the config in that standard initialize method, we go ahead and set the entity page size of some entity set to some value. Right? Again, you probably only need to do this on ones that have a huge number of rows. Now, once we do that, in fact, let's go ahead and do it. Oh, whoops. I'll just undo. I'll just do it this way. That was it, actually. Okay, so in here we say config set, and we have entity set page size, and we want to go ahead and say that titles we can do at most, let's do like 30. Okay, we'll save, we'll rebuild, and then notice when I hit refresh here, look at the scroll bar on the right. Yeah, you saw how it got much bigger, right? So now we have a smaller number of titles coming back, and that can actually negatively affect our client application, because now when we launch the application, it looks like we're seeing the entire set of books, right? This is it. We've got 30 books in our collection. But we have more than that. It's just that we ask for all of them, and it will expose us 30 at a time. So what we need to do is go in and figure out how to page through those. And there's a couple of ways we can do it. One is we can create a data service collection, and we can just keep going on and reading them all, one after the other, right? But that isn't too much better than what we had before. Probably what we want is to build in some sort of mechanism to allow the client to page through. I mean, humans can only understand, about 20 at a time anyway, so why not just allow them to page through if they need to see the rest of the titles? All right, so probably what we want to do is something like the bottom, and continually getting the continuation and going through and grabbing the next query. Okay, so let's go ahead and do this in our Scan in Books app and in our main window view model. And here's our query for books. And we're going to need to, let's see. So we have a data service query of title. And we basically want to execute that. Execute. And we're going to get back a response from that. So we'll say var response equals. Okay, and that response object is a query operation response. And in that query operation response, there's a method called getContinuation. So let's use explicit. Oh, I'm sorry. So yes, that's the response. But if we want a query operation response, so we'll say var query op response equals, and this is a I think it's query operation response. In fact, it's a query operation response of title. And that is response. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and store that. So let's refactor to a field. That's context. And then we'll say refactor to field, and that's the query op response. And then we will allow basically a next button that will utilize those existing values and allow us to page through. Another thing that we're probably going to want to do is do an order by, let's just order by book title alphabetically. Oh, this will now become like a var. Okay. Yeah, now we're going to need to cast this to something. This is going to be the order by. Okay, hold on. Okay, var query equals data service query dot order by. T goes to t dot book title. And then instead of going through the query, we're going to go through that query. Okay, let's just make sure this still works first, because that was quite an interesting change we just made. Okay, so that's the same set of books. We're still getting 30 books. This time they're ordered alphabetically so that we can see as we're paging through. Okay, so now let's go into the XAML and let's add a next. If I can find where we have it. I'm in the wrong place, that's the problem. There we go. Okay, let's add a next button. It's going to be button next and next. Okay, and then we'll do that same little kind of hacky thing here to hook it up. So I'm not using commanding, but that means I don't have to have a framework or anything like that, but it does make it kind of painful. Oops, click. I changed the wrong thing. Okay, and now let's go ahead and implement that method. And we'll just call view model.next, and then we'll implement that method. And what we'll do on that is we will first we'll actually execute the next version. So we'll say var continuation equals, we'll use the query op response, and we'll say get continuation. And then if there is continuation, so if the continuation is not equal to null, then we're going to say, clear the existing books, and then execute the query. So like var query equals context.execute title, but this time passing in the query op response. Actually, we already have it. Sorry, the continuation. And I think that should do it. Yeah, okay, cool. And then we need to basically say for each var title in the query dot to array, we'll go ahead and add the bookstad title. Yeah, we might not even need the to array. Let's see if that works. Something like that. We may have some bugs still, but something like that will work. Okay, so we get our first 30. They're all starting with A. We click next, and we get a problem. The top level link is only available after the response has been enumerated. We have enumerated the response. We enumerated it right there. Oh. Yeah, that's the problem. I see. Okay. Okay, so what we did was we created the query, we appended order by to the query, we executed the query, we got the response. I'm wondering if it's this. And then now that we've enumerated the response, we call get continuation. If the continuation is not null, then we execute the next one and we enumerate that as well. Let's try that. There we go. We lost the order by, and we did one bad thing. Okay, so let's see. In the response, because we did data service query execute. That's going to be interesting. I don't know that's going to work. The other thing we did basically was we executed the query down here, and then what we need to do is store that the query op response. So we're going to have to do something like this again. Let's query here. Okay. So let's try this. Yeah, that's what I was afraid of. Okay, one second. So I'm not sure what I did differently last night, but this is causing us a problem, the order by. Let me leave out the order by right now. Let's make sure we get the continuations working. Okay, so we see if set, we do next, we do next. Okay, so we are getting now paging through the set of options. We just need to do it in order. And I need to cast this to a data service query, because this thing is now not going to be a data service query is what's going on. Yeah, see, this is now an I ordered queryable. So let me just think for a second here. We're basically going to have to create a ds query equals data service query of that. This will be just query. Okay, so we've created our query. We're going to cast that to a data service query. We're going to execute, actually let's call it that. We're going to execute that query and cannot convert source type. This is going to be a title. Let's try that. Whew, fun. Okay. Okay, alphabetical order and paging. Awesome. Cool. Whew. That was kind of rough. All right, so we've got our query and we've got our continuations, and we're paging through now using server-side query, and we know that we're not going to have as high a likelihood of denial of service attacks. Okay, excellent. So now the next thing we want to talk about are query interceptors. And as I mentioned at the beginning, query interceptors are a way to further separate yourself from what's in the database. And the place where query interceptors are really important is when you have multiple sets of customers' data inside of your single table. All right, so I'm talking about a multi-tenant, application, and I have 10 different clients, and all of the clients' data is in the same table. And depending on the client that comes in, I only want them to see their data, not anybody else's data, right? So anytime I want to filter on the row, that's where I want to put in query interceptors. Okay, so let's just see how one of these things looks. Let's see. Let me stop debugging. I am stop debugging. Good. And we'll go back to our service. So our books data service. And here we're going to say query interceptor. And we'll just create a public. And so this is one of the most confusing aspects of the query interceptor is the actual syntax of the return parameter. So those of you who know how LINQ works underneath the covers, you know that it's basically taking the LINQ expressions, and then if we're using, let's say, Entity Framework, for example, there is a provider that looks at the expression, translates that expression into a T-SQL expression, and executes that T-SQL against the actual database. And that's similar to what's going to happen here. This expression that we write is going to be combined with the query. So we need to return an expression, that much we know. And this expression is really designed to filter. And so those of you who are familiar with the filter, with the where extension method in LINQ, know that it's a func of t and bool, right? So that's what we have here. We have a func of title, so it takes a title and it's going to make a Boolean decision about whether or not that title should be included. So that is the return type of our query interceptor. Okay, so we can call it whatever we want on query titles or something. And then in here, we have to return a lambda, right? So it's basically saying what sort of titles do we want to support. So let's say I only want like tech books or mass paperback books or something like that to come back. Let's just use tech books. So we'll say pipe separated tags contains, and then tech. I happen to know that that's the tag. Okay, cool. Sorry, the query interceptor attribute does take the entity set name that it's operating against. Okay, so we're talking about titles here. Okay, and so prior to this, we saw that there were a bunch of numbers and a bunch of A's in the book titles when we ran it. And now if we run it again, we should see different behavior, hopefully. Okay, yes, we made it all the way to D's because what we have here are just the tech books, right? Developer's Guide to SQL, About Face, Agile Software Development Ecosystems, etc., right? So we've successfully filtered out the rows that we want to return in our titles query by adding a query interceptor. And this is a very powerful mechanism. It's a very aspect-oriented mechanism too. Any questions there? Not a very communicative bunch today, are we? All right, fine. So that was query interceptors. Let's talk about the next thing, which are change interceptors. And these are very similar to the query interceptors, except for when a particular change is happening on a particular item. This we can do a query to basically see, do a a filter to basically make sure that this change is okay. Right? We'll only accept changes that meet a certain condition. So for example, if we take the multi-tenanted example that I gave earlier, if you don't want somebody to be able to add data for another customer, right? You only want them to be able to add data for their own customer. And so this is where you can put in validation logic, logging, or something like that. Right. So here what we're saying is, this is obviously the Northwind service. If the operation is a delete operation, on products, we want to say, hey, this can't be deleted. Instead, just go ahead and set discontinued to true. That's really that's the way to properly delete a product. Right. I don't think I'm going to do a demo of that one unless anybody really wants it. Oh, question. With respect to interceptors, can you dynamically deactivate them? You can dynamically put in logic. You can't deactivate them, but I could say, come on, there we go. I could say, oh gosh. If, date time dot now is, day of week is Tuesday, then I want to filter to be tech, because Tuesday's tech day, but Wednesday's, paperback day or something like that. So I can put in logic in my query interceptor that basically looks at other places, but I can't dynamically turn it on and off, right? I just have to put in logic that'll combine it only if certain conditions are true. Hopefully that made sense. It's a good question, by the way. All right, good. Thanks, Joe. All right. So change interceptors, we've covered. I'll get a little bit more here, but this one's a doozy. Okay, so last week I talked about custom data models, and just as a review, you need a property which exposes iQueryable. You have to have, the entity has to have a data service key to basically specify which property it will use. And I talked briefly, in order to get the update, you have to have the thing that you're implement iUpdatable. I see a typo. Or iData Service Update Provider or iData Service Update Provider 2. And in the latest version, I just found this out last night, they've actually hidden iUpdatable so that they really are, how should we say, strongly encouraging you to implement iData Service Update Provider 2. Right? So that's really the method that we're supposed to implement. Okay, so let me take a look at doing that. Let's go to our people data this time, our people repository. And this is actually quite a lot of code. Let me open a file. People data, people repository. Yeah. Okay, so let me go ahead and grab these methods. And you can see that there's quite a few of them. However, not all of them need to be implemented. You can see all of these last, I don't know, many are not implemented. I'm only implementing save changes, resolve, set value, get resource, delete resource, create resource, right? So here's your C, your D, and then these are basically your U, your set value, and they can use reflection to do their work. Okay, so it's not horrible. I wouldn't say it's good, but it's not too bad. Okay, so let's go ahead and implement iData service. What is it? Update provider 2. God dang it. Yeah, iData service update provider 2. Oh, so we don't have a reference to Microsoft Data Services? Huh, that's weird. How did we survive without that? Okay, so let me go ahead and add Microsoft Data Services. We just need the client. Oh, now we're implementing server type stuff. That's what it is. Okay, now we should, there we go. Excellent. Okay, got rid of all of our errors, and you can take a look at this after the fact. I mean, it's just using Activator to create instances, using Reflection to set. In fact, let me go ahead and put some breakpoints here. The reason why I put that int I equals 17 is so I could have a breakpoint here. All right, so we'll do that. We'll recompile. You know what? I might need another client. Let's go ahead and add a new project. This will be a console application, and it's going to be the people console app. Okay. And we'll go ahead and add a service reference to people data service and call it the people service reference. This is kind of a review of what we were talking about last time. You just add the new reference, and we will say of our context equals new service reference people repository. We're going to pass in a new URI of HTTP localhost something. Actually, it's 3125 people data service .sbc. Okay, so that's that, and then we will say for each var person in context people console write line the person's name, and then let me do one other thing here. I'm going to set them both to run, so I just want to wait to start until the other one's running correctly, and then I will maybe I'll update it. So we'll say context dot add to people new person, and this is my family. So we also have a dog, as you heard earlier when the mailman came. So that's going to be Daisy, and she is turning 11. She's kind of old. All right. Old and crotchety. And now we'll say save changes, and we'll go ahead and query it again. We'll actually do a whole new context. Okay. This will be context 2. Good. All right, so we've updated our people repository to be updatable. I'm gonna go ahead and run my people app. Oh God, that wasn't good. Let's just run it outside the debugger. So let's start up, and we'll do that. Okay, pressing the key to start. Ooh, fun. Oh, right. Okay, that was a bad decision on my part. Let's try that. Okay, here's our add, save. Context is already tracking a different entity with the same resource URI. Ah, right. What happened is the first time I ran it and it worked, and then the second time and third time it hasn't worked because it's already got the key. Okay, I see what happened. Ah, well, I guess our demo, that was kind of a flop, but so now if we look in this app and we just run it, we should see the new person, even though over here in people data, we just have the 4 that we started with. Because it's still in memory, if we do a debug start new instance, oh, yeah, well, so apparently we've added Daisy multiple times. I'm not sure how that's possible because the data service key should have caused the problem. Well, we did get the, oh, I see. Okay, so here's how the implementation of iUpdatable can come to bite you in the butt. What actually happened here, if we, let's stop the existing service. Okay, and because the people data repository was in memory, that should basically reset it back to what we had before. And now this time it's going to work, but let me show you as I walk through here, console read key, what is going on. So let me go to properties. I'll set the multiple startup projects, one in the service and one in the console app. And then I'll say go. And that one's going to be waiting for me to start. And then up here in our books data service, it's warming up, but we want people data service to warm up. And we want to see the set of people. And notice that there's 1, Scott, Chantal, Charlotte, Julia, 4, right? Okay. So let me go into the people repository, and we've already got some breakpoints on here, so they should get hit. And the problem is we're not, when there's a failure, we're not backing back out, right? So we're not implementing this reset resource, and that's really our issue. Or it may be clear changes. This is one of these two, right? So, but this time it's going to work. So if we hit return, it first queries for the first 4, right? Scott, Chantal, Charlotte, Julia. And then we go ahead and say add to people and save changes. Now when I step over this one, it's going to flip over to the server side. Now we're debugging on the server side, and we've called create resource on container people. And we go ahead and we create a blank instance. All right, so this is a name of null and an age of 0, and we go ahead and add it to people. And then we say go again, and the next thing that's going to get called is a set. We're setting the age to be 11. All right, and then we get another set, and this time we're getting the name to be Daisy, and we set that using reflection. And now we get our save changes, and the first time through, save changes is going to work. The rest of the time, it's not going to work, and it's going to call either reset resource or clear changes, one of the two. And so if we just run it again outside of the, well, we can run it again inside, it's fine. Debug, start new instance. Okay, so this is the second time through. There's our call to save. There's our create, set, call the save changes. And there's our invalid operation. And then, what just happened there? I think I hit go on the wrong place. Okay, set reference, is it set reference? That's what it is. Remove reference from collection, I bet is what's getting called. No, it may do. Let me just add them to all of them. I thought it was one of those two. Schedule invocable. I think the schedule invocable is actually one of the new ones. Move reference, add reference. So maybe what we should be doing is in save changes, figuring out which resource it is that we are adding, and then manually check to see if it's in the collection already. Okay, one more time. Here's the save changes. And it does call resolve resource. Okay, so that's our place basically. In resolve resource, we would have to check to make sure that it's not already in the collection. And then if it is, then back it out, right? Because in the create resource, we went ahead and added it to the collection. Okay, so that's what it is. As I said, this stuff is not for the faint of heart. When you start getting into concurrency and things like that, it can get really complicated. There are some examples online of doing this if you're using a link to SQL data source. There's some examples of implementing iUpdatable for that. But if you're talking about your own custom collections and stuff, you're going to have to implement all of these things yourself. Okay. Switching gears yet again, now let's start talking about hosting. So up until now, the only thing that we've hosted in was a WCF service, which is really running under IS Express, as we saw down in the bottom of my system tray. If we want to, there's a couple of things we might want to do with hosting. First is, by default, as you saw, it was using that booksdataservice.svc extension. And now, thanks to the system.web.routing assembly, we can go ahead and utilize a service route and get rid of the annoying, .svc. So let's go ahead and do that first. I'm actually, because I know I have another demo coming up, I'm actually going to do this in a sort of longer way. But I'm going to add a new project. And that project's an ASP.NET MVC4 application. And I'm going to say MVC4 hosting app. Actually, I'll just say MVC4 app because it's going to be doing two things. All right, we'll say OK. And I'm just going to create a basic MVC4. Wow. Okay. Now, the reason why it takes so long for MVC is because it downloads like 30 NuGet packages or something. 25. All right. Anyway, so we went ahead and created an MVC project. And those of you who are familiar with MVC know that the routes are set up in the route register routes, and in the in there you'll find a routes map route, which sets the standard controller action ID route that we're familiar with. Okay, so we need to do a couple of things. One is we don't want this thing being incorrectly interpreted as a controller, controller action. So we want to segregate the two. So I'm going to just call this site. Right? So if you prefix the existing URLs with site, then in order for them to go to the appropriate controller, you're going to have to type that in the URL. And now I'm going to add my own route. I'm going to say routes.add a, this is going to be the name. So this is going to be like books data route. And then we'll have a new service route. And we'll need to reference system.serviceModel.activation. And that's it. Well, I was expecting more. So you also need to reference the system.serviceModel and system.serviceModel.web, but those were already in this, so that's why we didn't have any more. Okay, so the first thing is the route prefix, and we know that site's going to use one thing. We already have API for the web API. Here I'm just going to say books. And then we need a service host factory base, and this is going to be new data service host factory. And we are going to need a reference for this that we probably don't have right now. Yeah, and it's telling me to do it this way, but it doesn't want me to do it this way. It wants me to do it through NuGet. So add new or manage NuGet packages. We're going to have Microsoft.data services, and we're going to add the server. And there you go. And now what do we need? There we go. System service model. I was expecting that. And then the final argument is the actual type that we're trying to expose. So this is for us going to be type of books data service. Data service. And we are going to need to reference that other project in order to see this. Okay. Good. So we'll set this as the startup project. Now I haven't set the default route to be something useful, so when it comes up it's going to give us a directory forbidden. I think. Come on. No, sorry, forgot one other thing. So when you're using WCF underneath ASP.NET, one of the things you have to do, especially if you're using the routing feature, is turn on ASP.NET compatibility. This is another place where the law of leaky abstractions is taking place, and we actually get to see that we're built on top of a WCF service. So in here, boy, I hate it when they don't alphabetize things. I'm going to try and get past my anality though, and this can be simplified quite a bit. Okay, there's system.web server, and there's the runtime, and then there's entity framework at the very bottom. So we need two things. We actually need the connection string, which we forgot to put in. So that's going to be in the WCF Data Services web config already. I'll just steal it from there and then go over to this web config and paste it. Okay, and then the second thing we need is the system.serviceModel section. System.serviceModel, and we want to say, what is this, the hosting, I can't remember. What is it? Service hosting environment, ASP.NET compatibility enabled is true. Okay, so now that we've turned that on, when we refresh, where were we? We apparently closed it down. So let me run it again. We should get that directory listing. Okay, forbidden, yes. And then if we go to books, there we have it. And then titles. Nice. Okay, so that's a little bit of a cleaner URL. Quite nice. Any questions on that? Let me check out. Can a parameter be passed? Uh-oh. I hope. Can you expand upon that? I'm not sure exactly when that was asked. So can a parameter be passed to what? Sorry about that. I should have checked earlier. Okay, I'll come back to you in just a second. Well, okay. Can a parameter be passed? Yeah, I'm not certain where the parameter was being passed. Okay, so I was doing hosting, but prior to hosting, we were doing custom data models. Sorry, I'm not certain where that was coming from. So if you can clarify, I'll move on and then I'll come back to you in just a second. Okay, we've got 2 more demos. What are we looking at time-wise here? We've got about 5 more minutes. That should be about right. Okay, the next demo we want to do is a self-hosting demo. So let's say I don't want to use IIS at all. I have my own Windows service. I'm talking about communication maybe with over named pipes or something like that. So in that case, I can go ahead and create a new add project console application, and we'll say this is a console self-host. Okay, and we're going to add a reference to Microsoft.Data Services. Microsoft.Data Services. Why did that not appear? There it is. And once we've done that, we can go ahead and close, and we'll say var host equals new data service host. Yep, that's the one. And we may need a reference to system service model web and system service model. And then we just say, actually, I need the base address too. Let me just grab this stuff off the slide. Okay, we'll say books, and this will be the books data service. And books data service is referenced from that other library. Actually, it's not even a library, which is kind of yucky. But and then we'll say host.open. I would probably move those out into separate library. Pressing the key to exit, and host.close. Okay, and then if we set this as the startup project and we launch it, pressing the key to exit, that's great. Now if we open up and we just say HTTP localhost, notice the lack of port, books, books entities connection string again, of course. So let's go to this app config, and we'll steal that connection string. Okay, run it again. And then, come on. Oh, okay. Apparently we were still running. That's weird. Okay, so let's build again because I don't trust it when it built and I was still running. And then we'll go ahead and launch it and refresh over here. And there you go. So that's self-hosted. Titles we can still see, etc. Okay, so we've done self-hosted, we've done hosted in MVC. The last demo is OData in Web API. It was about interceptors. Okay, good question. Can parameters be passed to interceptors? Yes, they can. So the parameters have to be primitive parameters, but yes, they can. I think that was on the slide. If not, I should update it. Oh. Oh, I see what you're saying. So you want to say on query orders where the parameter is this. That stuff will get combined after this. So how do I say this? The results of the filter, the filter that the client has specified will get applied after this. So they can still say, I only want certain titles, or I only want 10 of them, or I want to select out just certain columns, etc. All that stuff will get applied after this. So this is basically controlling the root of the query, and the client's additional filters will get applied after this. They'll get combined with this, in fact. So hopefully that answers your question. If not, just type it in again and I'll try and clarify further. Okay, so last time we talked about, some of the differences between Web API and OData, and we said, Web API also exposes RESTful services. The place where I would want to use Web API over OData is when I had just a couple of types of data being exposed, and I wanted a lot more control over what error codes they return in certain situations and things like that. And I said you would prefer OData when you have a larger number of types, right? So I'm fine with creating a controller per type as long as I have 5 of them. But when I have 5,000 of them, forget that. I don't want a controller per type. That's a crazy amount of code to write and maintain, right? So that's where OData would be good. And as you remember from last time, one of the primary benefits of OData was not only the CRUD methods per type, but the number of queries and allowing the clients to create those queries. It turns out that we can still get that inside of OData. So this is a good place where they overlap. So let me go into my MVC4 application and create a new books controller. And then, the normal, whoops, I forgot to set it to an API controller. No big deal. I'll just manually convert it. So API controller, and this is going to be a iQueryable of book, title, and it's going to be called get. And title's going to need a reference. Okay. And then how the API controllers work, the Web API, you need to basically reference the database and return the, normally this would be an IEnumerable of title that get is going to return, but we've changed that IEnumerable to a queryable. But I'm still going to need some sort of database connection to actually get the information. So I'm going to create a constructor for the books controller, and I'm going to store the context. Context equals new, and this is the connection to the database. So this is from the server to the database, not from the client to the server. This is not a data service context. This is a DB context. And so I create that context, and let me go ahead and refactor that into a field. And then I also need to dispose it after it's done. So let me override dispose and kill that context.dispose. Okay, great. So here I would say using underscore sorry, I've already created the context. All I need to do is return context.titles. Okay, so now that's how a normal web API would look, other than this would say, IEnumerable. Yeah, let's just run it like that first, just to show you that this is the normal way. Set as start project. We're going to go ahead and run. It's going to open up our browser to the right port. We're going to go API/books. And that we are in Internet Explorer, so this is going to prompt us to open up a JSON file. Let me just save that. Oh, God. Oh. IEnumerable of books. I'm forgetting something, but I am not remembering what it is right now. Get API controller. Okay. Well, I hope I'll pick it up. So let's pretend that worked for right now, and then all I need to do to change it over to a queryable is I need to set that, and I need to say that. This is what I was missing. Yeah, I've got nothing right here. Okay, so add service, manage NuGet packages, Microsoft.Data Services, and I need, crap. Okay, hold on. Let's go Web API OData. Yeah, that's the one. Accept. Okay, close. Yes. Okay. I still feel like I'm doing something wrong. Oh, I know what it is. Okay, sorry. So the problem was if we could have actually seen the exception, which is a little bit harder to see in this because we're not talking about WCF and just turning on the first chance or include exception details and false. We could have, it would have said something about how the class title underscore what looks like a GUID is not a known type. All right, so what we're going to need to do is set the configuration of this context to turn off lazy loading and to turn off proxy generation. Okay, that should do it. Let's go ahead and give it a run. Okay, and we'll go API/books. Okay, this books.json, it's perfect. Let's save that as completed. Let's go ahead and open it, and there we have it. Boom. So, and then of course we can start combining this stuff. Here, let's use this one. Let's use Chrome. It's weird that Chrome's default is XML and IE's default is JSON. They seem backwards. I don't know why, but okay. So API books. This time we get the list of XML. Perfect. And then we say, you know, query string parameter, where the what are we supposed to say? Is fiction. Sorry. $filter equals is fiction equals true. Okay, that might have saved us, but we need something more. Let's see. How about where format? There we go. Let's try that one. Where format equals 2. Okay, I think that actually worked, but it was difficult to see that it worked. So let me try maybe a 3. Yeah, okay, you can see it's changing to 2, changing to 3. Okay, cool. So anyway, now the client is using the Web API and dynamically creating queries that allow it to control what it sees. Okay, any questions? All right. Well, I think that about wraps it up. So just to recap what we had to do there, we can expose iQuerybles as gets. We had to add the NuGet package for webapi.odata and add the reference to system.web.http.odata. We had to turn it on via config enable query support. We didn't actually have to do that anymore. That was in a prior version, I believe. And we had to explicitly mark the method as queryable, which we did. Okay, and then that is it. So what do we see? We saw turning on the JSON, the new JSON format to reduce serialization size, or you can also add something like gzip. If you're using an older version, you'll have to add the JSON P support to allow format equals JSON from the browser. We talked about load property and expand for grabbing those related entities. We talked about merge option when we were doing additional queries and there were concurrency issues. We talked about one way to fix that being using row version and concurrency mode. In the query and change interceptors, we talked about how to filter by rows and validate a change before it happens. And then we talked about using iUpdatable / iData service query and so forth to allow updating of non-ORM data sources, but that is very difficult. We talked about a couple of different hosting options, MVC or console, and we talked about leveraging OData from the Web API. And that's about it for me. How can I download the presentation and the code snippets? Is that given out at all? Of course it is. So the presentation will be found on develop.com. Come on, there we go. Develop.com. And if you go down into your free webcast view all, this is where it will be. And it takes 24 hours for us to get that up there after we've done the editing and noise reduction and so forth. And then where the slides will be is if you go to same place as last time. This is what I posted within 24 hours of the webinar last time. And I'll post another one, here. So it's Brain Hertz Consulting, hcconsulting.com, and I'll include the demos and the slides. Record of the previous webinar, absolutely. Oh wait, code snippets. So I'm going to give you all of the code, not code snippets per se, but because I basically just typed all that stuff by hand. I think the only snippet I used was like CRK, which is a little snippet that I wrote that just does a console write line, console read key. All right, anyway. So yes, are the other webinars available? They are here. And all I have to do is find it. I'm not seeing it, huh? OData. Mary? Are you still on? Is it? I thought it was up already, no? Oh, okay. Okay, great. And actually, can you include the last link in this recording as well? Yeah, it sounds like maybe a couple of people didn't get to see that other. So hopefully they knew all about WCF Data Services before we started, because this was some advanced stuff. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we'll get that. Hopefully that first presentation included in this one. Okay, well, thank you very much for attending, everyone. I'm just going to hang out for a couple more minutes to see if there are any other questions, but hopefully you enjoyed it.